Marcus Webley, M.D. was a television series running from 1969 through 1976 starring Robert Young as Dr. Webley. The show also featured James Brolin as Dr. Stephen Kiley and Elena Verdugo as Consuelo Lopez, Welby's nurse. Marcus Webley, M.D. was a very popular show and became the first ABC network show to finish at the top of the Nielsen ratings, which is a measurement system used to determine the size of the audience and the composition of a television programming. At the height of its run, the show was viewed regularly in 1 in 4 American households. The show was very successful until the end of its run in 1976 when the unrealistic romanticized approach by Dr. Webley and his colleagues became less popular with the public. By the 1970s, the golden age of medicine was over. New technology is on the rise. For example, computers are now being used by doctors to assist with diagnosis. With times changing, so were the ideas of health. In 1973, Roe v. Wade made it legal to have an abortion and became a constitutional right for women. As time went on, in 1975, doctors went on strike to protest for improved patient care in hospitals. They were no longer seen as all-knowing beings. They were now seen as humans that were capable of making mistakes. Previously, doctors were seen as able to cure all ailments, including non-medical ailments such as relationship problems or bad grades in school. In the show, health is one of the most important aspects of life. Doctors get very personal to their patients to get a background idea of what could be affecting their health. Because doctors had medical knowledge that the general public lacked, they were seen as the ultimate authority on medicine and could cure nearly anything. In the show, Marcus Webley gets very involved with his patients' personal lives, but he was always wise when it came to making diagnosis and only cared for the patient's health overall. By doing this, he became a romanticized hero for medicine. We chose 3 episodes based specifically on their controversial issues and depictions of doctors and their patients at the time, and how the influence of race, class, gender, and other cultural factors shaped the development of the show and the depiction of doctors. First, we have Echo of a Baby's Laugh, which is an episode about a woman who develops complications during pregnancy and is forced to tell her husband of a previous pregnancy that ended in an abortion when she was a teen. The husband is furious and wants to leave his wife, but Dr. Webley sets him straight. Our next episode is Madonna with Knapsack and Flute. This episode is about Dr. Webley's love interest taking an unmarried, pregnant hippie into her home with the full intention of maintaining her and her baby. Finally, we have Brave on a Mountaintop, an episode in which Dr. Webley urges a young American Indian with emphysema to return to the clean air of his reservation. Different races were depicted on the show, but none were of a specific race. Both doctors and nurses were all white, and the majority of the patients in the show were also white. A few episodes depict minorities, however, when minorities were depicted on the show, they were often very sick patients who did not listen to medical advice or were in an inferior role. Gender played a large role in how doctors were viewed during the 1970s. Still, the role of a physician was primarily seen as a male's role. The female medical professionals were generally nurses, as depicted in the show, and they played a minor role that was inferior to the doctor. Female patients were also seen as more delicate and irrational compared to their male counterparts. Another focus of the clinical gaze of the physician was the class of the patient. The higher the patient's class, the better care they would receive. The upper class individuals would have more say in their care than someone of a lower class. Upper class individuals would be able to afford prestigious doctors and the best care. Doctors and nurses were seen as upper class individuals as well, that would be able to drive nice cars or vehicles and have large homes with prestigious amenities and material goods. Another influence on how doctors were seen was the medical organization. The medical system was organized into 2 main areas, the hospitals and the clinics. Hospitals were still seen as the best place to receive medical care, but people also used the clinic for non-urgent care. The clinics were seen as a more personal side of medicine. Along with everything else, there were various cultural influences that affected the show and the public perception of physicians. In 1975, junior doctors were upset with the system that insurance created and went on strike. They wanted higher pay and the right to do private practice, such as in a clinic. Generally, they would work overtime or what was called goodwill work. The strike ended up successful, but at a price. This action caused some negativity to go towards doctors from the public, even though the doctors were working for better patient care. In the midst of the women's movement, it was often hard to have the same opportunities as a man. Women sought out to have the right to equal pay, equal opportunity, and the rights to protect themselves against misogyny. In Roe v. Wade, women fought for the reproductive right to abort a pregnancy. The end result of this was a big step for women. Women could get the constitutional right to legal abortions. This changed the clinical gaze of doctors and allowed the public to see them in a higher esteem because of the freedoms that they were granted. Native Americans took to the streets of Washington, D.C. to protest the right of self-determination of Native Americans, as well as the government correcting the actions of broken treaties. This affected how race was viewed from the medical standpoint because Native Americans were seen as equals by law and thus had to be seen equals in medicine as well. The hippie movement wasn't just about bell-bottom jeans and flowers. They stood for an anti-war agenda, along with wanting the U.S. military to get out of Vietnam. They also had a growing love for the environment, the Rolling Stones, and John Lennon. This hurt the view of doctors at the time because the hippies were looking for more natural and holistic treatments. The doctors at the time were not able to do many of these treatments because they were held to medical practices that were developed through science. For years, African American peoples were looked at as less than other peoples. For decades, African American people fought to have the same legal rights that white people had. The ultimate end goal was to have equal opportunity in employment, in education, housing, access to public facilities, and even the right to vote. This again caused a shift in the clinical gaze because it made doctors treat people of all races equally by law. This concludes our analysis of Dr. Webley and how clinicians were viewed in the 1970s. Thank you for viewing our movie.